All right, what's going on, guys? Dan Watson, and we have all the details on Sony's new FX6. I've been sitting on these for a while, had some time to kind of digest the specs and everything on this camera and take a look at how it compares to a bunch of other cameras on this. I have the camera coming in shortly, hopefully, so we'll have some comparisons and some details for review, that kind of stuff. A lot of stuff with the S3 too, because this camera might be the third in Sony's Cinema series lineup compared to like the Venice and the FX9. However, it actually has a lot in common with the A7S III, and it kind of feels more like a grown-up of that camera than maybe a baby FX9 in a lot of ways. So in fact, there are actually a lot of reasons that this camera is going to make the Sony A7S III look even more appealing. So let's kind of dig into the specs on this and break it down for you guys. So this is Sony's FX9. All right, so the sensor itself comes out to a full frame backside illuminated sensor, which we've come to love from Sony. It comes out to about 10.2 megapixels, and it really kind of feels like it's a Sony A7S III sensor. However, it is formatted widescreen, so instead of like the 3.2 or 3:2 aspect ratio of like a still camera like this. Now, it is also dual gain, so 800 and 12,800 ISO, so great low light performance most likely we're going to expect from this one. Now, the aspect ratio change means that you're going to be able to get DCI 4K out of that full frame sensor, which we actually cannot get on the S3. So that's a big change right there. Now, a little bit different from the way that the FX9 is doing it. So the FX9 has a higher resolution, 6K sensor, and is oversampling in order to get that 4K image. There's some downsides there. The good side is that you're getting amazing quality 4K. The downside is that even 4K 60 demands a crop. There's no super high resolution like 4K 120 or anything like that, even on the FX9. Now, the FX6 is going to have extremely great dynamic range, 15 plus stops with S-Log3, and then it is also going to be able to have 4K 60 and actually 4K 120, but more on that. So let's get into these frame rates here, because this is the first big surprise, and honestly, there are some disappointments here most likely. So there's a different wrapper on your movie files here. So the A7S III recorded in XAVC-S. This now, the FX6 will record in XAVC Intra or XAVC Long Op. And that is going to be just like an FX9 on there, which in theory should be amazing, but keep in mind there's some negatives here. The first big surprise is, yes, we do have 10-bit 422 recording up to 600 megabits per second, which is awesome, but it is only at 4K 60. If you actually want to record 4K 120, you are going to have to use Sony's S&Q mode, which does mean you're not going to get audio. It's a separate place on the dial, and it will already be in slow motion, so it's not recording it into 120 frames per second file. It's actually at 24 frames per second, already slowed down. So kind of a negative on that one, and a little bit surprising on that. Now, also, that is only going to be in 4K UHD. DCI 4K will not be able to go past 60 frames per second. Also, there is a 10% crop anytime that you want to go past 120 frames per second or 120 frames per second. So 4K 120, there is a crop, or any of your higher frame rate modes in 1080p, there is also going to be a crop on there. Now, another interesting thing is that that is going to be a 10-bit file, but if you want to shoot like their long GOP or any of the smaller bitrate files, those are only going to be 8-bit 420 in 4K. It does jump up to 10-bit at 1080p, but in 1080p, you're still maxed out to 60 frames per second unless you go into that S&Q mode. If you go into the S&Q mode, you can record up to 240 frames per second, but do keep in mind we've seen some quality loss before, so I'm really curious to test that out. But 6 months ago, I would have been pretty impressed with these numbers on a full frame camera, and then came the S3. And now I'm like a spoiled brat, and I am left wondering why this camera handles 10-bit 422 up to 120 frames per second and can shoot 10-bit 422 in a variety of different modes on here, yet the FX6 can only handle 10-bit 422 in one format right there, and only up to 60 frames per second before I need to jump into the S&Q mode. Also, you might have noticed there's no internal RAW recording. I'm not that surprised at the lack of that one, and most cameras do not have that. However, on the S3, we also had external RAW recording via HDMI up to 60 frames per second. Now, you can do it on the FX6, but it is only over SDI, which means recorders like this Ninja V right here are not going to work. You are only going to be able to use something like the Atomos Shogun 7 if you want to have an option for RAW recording. Again, that kind of feels like a little bit of a downgrade from this right here. This setup right here can shoot 4K 60 RAW really inexpensively and is absolutely amazing with basically the same sensor, or 4K 120 internally in a standard profile, and a whole bunch of bitrate options with 10-bit. And yet we're a little bit more limited in the types of codecs that we can use for 10-bit recording and the kind of options that we have for external RAW and things like that on the FX6. So that's kind of my take about it. It kind of feels a little bit negative, but you can let me know in the comments what you guys think about that. So compared to the S3, there are a few drawbacks here. Now, the hardware itself is very similar to the FS5 as far as size is concerned, and that's pretty awesome because the FS5 is a Super 35, and this is now a full frame camera. Now, a couple hardware things. So first of all, it is dual cards and is using the CF Express Type A as well as SD, just like the A7S III, and I want to dig into that a little bit more because I don't think that system is quite making sense for the FX6. And here is why. You can actually not record 4K 120 at all on the SD card. So you have to use CF Express Type A. You can actually record 4K 120 on the A7S III. You do not need CF Express Type A for that. So there is a big difference on that one. So that means you're going to need to buy these cards. Now, first of all, these cards are expensive. $400 for 160 gigs. Ugh, not cheap on that one. Also, these cards are only made by Sony right now, so not a whole lot of options. Hopefully those cards are great because there is only one option on the market right now. The other thing is you can only get them at 160 gigs, which at 600 megabits per second in 4K 60 is only going to be about 35 minutes, I think, on those cards. And that makes it not very usable in a lot of situations. You're going to be swapping cards like crazy on those. Now, keep in mind, that means that you're probably going to want SD cards for your 4K 24, 4K 30 type stuff, and then you're going to be using the CF Express Type A if you want to get into 4K 120. That's going to be kind of a mix of different cards and recordings. And so I wish that they had either gone with like a CF Express Type B, which are widely available and you can get them up to like a terabyte right now, or had at least given us some different bit rates and options for recording 10-bit 4K 60 or 4K 120 at something that could be recorded on the SD card like they did for the A7S III, since there really isn't a whole lot of options right now. Now, that's going to get better with time for sure. Those are kind of some initial growing pains with the SD card slots, but I do wish that there were some more options with that. So sorry for the little rant there. Thankfully, the rest of the hardware looks pretty solid. You do have a magnesium alloy body, significant weather sealing all around this, a lot of seals on this, so that should be awesome. You do have a 3.5-inch screen, although the resolution's a little low. It is just 1280 by 720, so less than 1,000,000 dots. That does seem a little low for that one. Now, the main attraction is going to be connectivity, and it is all there. So you have HDMI, you have SDI, you do have, the SDI does have a 16-bit raw output on that one. You do have timecode, you do have dual XLR ports. You also have a hot shoe and handle, so you can handle Sony's digital audio adapter connection, so you can get up to 4 channels of audio when you start running all of these things simultaneously, which is actually really awesome. And then obviously you have the built-in ND filters, which Sony's are really cool. They use electronic variable NDs, which are really, really awesome. Once you start using this stuff, it is really difficult to go back to like regular variable ND filters and not having it built into the camera. But probably my favorite thing right here, and that is we don't have IBIS, which is kind of expected. You don't really have it in these movie cameras. There's reasons for that. However, this will be compatible with Catalyst Browse, which is Sony's software that uses gyro data from the camera to be able to stabilize and post. I have done it a lot with the S3. It is amazing, and it gives you an advantage that you really couldn't get with any other video camera. There are a couple that are using electronic stabilization in camera, but it is never going to be as good as using the gyro data. It does mean you have to do one extra step in post, but the software is very quick at doing it, and that does give you one up on the competition there. Now do keep in mind that anytime you stabilize in post, you will get a crop. So you have to be okay with that, but if you are okay with that, that's definitely going to be a huge win for the Sony here. So the camera is going to ship with an AC adapter, is going to be supplied with a BPU35 battery. It will accept any of the BPU series batteries. It stacks on the back so you can use bigger sizes. One of the advantages of these cinema style cameras is that you can use larger batteries for them or AC adapters really easily. It will be priced at $6,000 in the US, and it will be available in about 30 days, so inside of the mid-December range, and that's actually really awesome. I thought we would have to wait a lot longer on that. So the big question is actually, should you think about getting this camera and how it compares to some of the other ones out there? Now, Sony's FX9, this actually compares very favorable to it. The FX6 is actually going to give you some features that the FX9 doesn't have. So you are going to get things like 4K 120. You are going to get 1080p at 240 frames per second. You're probably going to get better low light performance, and it's a smaller compact body. So a lot of advantages there. What is interesting is if you start comparing it to something like the S3, and I know this is kind of rigged out. This is not normally how I would have my S3. I usually use it a little bit more compact, but in this format right here, this thing can shoot 4K 60 RAW right to this recorder with unlimited storage virtually, with a 2 terabyte SSD in it. And so there are a lot of advantages to this. It can shoot 4K 120 internal without going to S&Q mode. And there are just a lot of different things. It has no crop when you're recording 4K 120. So if you're looking for high-speed recording, the Sony A7S III actually comes out a little bit better. You're also going to get things like IBIS on that one, and an even more compact body, which you can build out with a rig or something like this if you do want to, and giving you even extra channels of audio using the digital interface from Sony. So you do have a lot of the capabilities that you would want from higher-end cameras on the S3, including some better 4K 120 modes on there. So let me know what you guys think in the description below. I'll do some more tests. Let me know kind of what you guys want me to test, any questions that you have. We'll see if we can get those answered for you. Hope you guys are doing amazing. Talk to you guys soon in a new video.